The studio lights were bright, and the air carried a sense of excitement. The audience had been waiting all day for this special episode of Trevor Noah's show, and the moment had finally arrived. Trevor walked onto the stage with his usual charm, a smile spreading across his face as the crowd cheered loudly. He greeted them with a few jokes, making everyone laugh and feel comfortable. Then, he built up the moment everyone had been waiting for, the introduction of his guest. "Ladies and gentlemen," Trevor announced with energy in his voice, "please welcome the one and only Keanu Reeves." The crowd erupted into applause. People jumped to their feet, clapping, cheering, and even whistling. Keanu walked onto the stage quietly, wearing his usual simple black suit with his long hair falling around his face. He waved to the audience with a small, humble smile. He didn't move with the flash of a typical Hollywood star. Instead, he carried himself with calmness, almost as if he didn't want too much attention. That only made the audience love him more. Trevor reached out and shook Keanu's hand warmly, pulling him in for a friendly hug. The two men sat down across from each other, and the cheers slowly died down, leaving a buzz of anticipation in the air. Everyone wanted to hear what Keanu would say. Trevor started the conversation with his usual humor. "Keanu, thank you for being here. I've got to be honest, you're one of those people who, no matter what room you walk into, everyone instantly feels cooler. So, thank you for making me feel cool tonight." The audience laughed, and Keanu gave a modest smile. He leaned slightly forward and replied softly, "Thank you for having me, Trevor. I'm happy to be here." His voice was calm, almost soothing, and it made everyone in the room pay attention. Trevor went on with a light question, asking about Keanu's latest film project. Keanu gave a short answer, talking briefly about the experience of working with a great team and how grateful he was for the chance to do what he loved. But very quickly, Trevor noticed something about his guest. Keanu wasn't like the other celebrities who usually filled their answers with stories about success, money, or fame. He seemed quieter, more thoughtful, and perhaps even a little guarded. Sensing this difference, Trevor leaned in and asked, "Keanu, you're one of the most loved actors in the world. People admire not just your movies, but who you are as a person. How do you stay so grounded?" The question hung in the air. The audience waited for Keanu's response, expecting perhaps a funny or light-hearted answer. But Keanu took his time. He looked down for a moment, as though he was carefully choosing his words. Finally, he looked back up at Trevor, his eyes filled with a quiet honesty. "I think," Keanu began slowly, "that life has a way of reminding us what really matters. For me, it's not about being a star or being seen. It's about being human. And being human means facing struggles, just like everyone else." The audience grew quieter. His words had already shifted the atmosphere. Trevor nodded, curious to hear more. Keanu continued, speaking gently but firmly. "You know, when people look at Hollywood, they think it's all glamour. But the truth is, no matter who you are, life doesn't protect you from pain, from loss, or from difficult times. I've experienced those things, and they've shaped me into who I am today." The audience was captivated. Some leaned forward in their seats, not wanting to miss a word. Trevor tilted his head slightly, his expression softening. He realized that Keanu wasn't going to give a rehearsed, surface-level answer. He was about to share something real, something deep. Trevor smiled gently and said, "That's powerful, Keanu. But it also makes me wonder, when you face those struggles, how do you manage to stay kind? Because people always talk about your kindness. That's rare in this world, especially in your industry." Keanu gave a small laugh, almost shy, as if he wasn't comfortable with so much praise. Then he answered, "I think kindness is a choice. Every day, we have chances to be kind or to turn away. For me, I choose kindness because I know what it feels like to need it." I know what it feels like to be going through something quietly, and then someone offers a smile, or a helping hand, or just a little patience. That can mean everything." The audience applauded softly, not wanting to break the intimate moment but feeling moved by his words. Trevor placed his hand over his chest and said, "Wow. You've just made me feel like I need to rethink my whole life." Keanu chuckled, shaking his head. "No, no. I don't mean to sound like a teacher. I'm just sharing my experience. But if it helps someone, then I'm glad." The first part of their conversation carried a surprising weight. Viewers expected laughter, stories about action films, maybe a few behind-the-scenes jokes. Instead, they were being gifted something else: Keanu's quiet wisdom. Trevor could feel it, and so could the audience. They weren't just watching an interview anymore, they were witnessing a real moment of truth. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second, but it felt less like television and more like a private conversation between two people who respected each other deeply. Trevor asked another question about how Keanu saw success, and once again, Keanu's answer wasn't about fame or wealth. He explained how success, to him, was simply waking up every morning, being grateful, and doing the best he could for himself and others. As he spoke, Trevor leaned back in his chair, his expression soft with admiration. The crowd listened silently, not even whispering among themselves. It was as if Keanu had taken everyone to a place of reflection, reminding them that even their favorite stars were human, and that being human was enough. By the time part one of their talk reached its close, the atmosphere in the room had shifted completely. The energy wasn't just excitement anymore, it was respect, admiration, and quiet thought. Keanu had set the stage for what was about to become one of the most memorable interviews Trevor had ever hosted. The audience was still buzzing from Keanu's first thoughtful answers. They had expected a light-hearted celebrity chat, but something different was happening. Trevor leaned forward in his chair, sensing there was more to uncover. He looked at Keanu with curiosity, almost forgetting for a moment that they were on national television. "Keanu," Trevor said softly, "you mentioned that life has a way of reminding us what really matters. I think a lot of people see you as this mysterious figure, someone who doesn't live the typical Hollywood life. You take the subway, you ride your motorcycle alone, and you live quietly. Is that your way of keeping balance?" Keanu smiled faintly, nodding. "I guess you could say that. I've never been comfortable with too much attention. Fame can be overwhelming, and it can make people forget who they are. For me, I like simple things. Taking a walk, reading a book, sharing a meal with a friend. Those things mean more to me than being in a spotlight." The audience clapped gently, some smiling warmly at his words. They admired how different he was from other stars. Trevor grinned, shaking his head. "You see, that's why people love you. Most people would be bragging about luxury cars, private jets, and giant mansions. But you're telling me the highlight of your day is a good walk." Keanu chuckled softly, his shoulders lifting. "Yes, because in the end, that's life. The quiet moments. The people you love. Fame and fortune don't comfort you when you're hurting. But a kind word, a small gesture, or a moment of peace, those things do." Trevor grew serious. He looked at Keanu for a long moment, then asked, "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" His voice carried genuine care, almost as if he didn't want to pry but felt it needed to be asked. Keanu paused, looking down for a second before raising his eyes back to Trevor. The room grew still again, as though the audience sensed something important was coming. "Yes," Keanu answered softly. "I have been through difficult times. Just like everyone else. Maybe people don't expect that because they only see the movies or the red carpets. But behind all of that, there's a person. And that person has faced loss, loneliness, and grief." The air felt heavy with emotion. The audience sat quietly, waiting. Trevor didn't interrupt. He gave Keanu the space to continue. When I was young, Keanu explained, life wasn't always easy. My family went through struggles, and there were times when I felt like the ground beneath me was unsteady. Later, as an adult, I faced loss that changed me forever. But even in those moments, I realized something important: pain can teach you how to value joy. It teaches you how precious the little things are. The crowd was silent, almost holding their breath. Many of them knew about Keanu's past hardships, but hearing him speak so openly about them felt different. It wasn't gossip or a headline. It was real, spoken from his own heart. Trevor leaned back in his chair, his eyes soft with compassion. You know, Keanu, most celebrities would never share this side of themselves. They protect their image. But here you are, telling us about loss and grief with such honesty. It's rare. Keanu gave a small smile, almost shy. Maybe it's rare, but I think it's important. We all go through something. Every person in this audience has faced pain in their lives. Maybe if we talked about it more, we'd understand each other better. We'd realize we're not alone. That sentence hit the audience deeply. Someone in the front row wiped away a tear. Others nodded, moved by his words. Trevor let the moment linger before speaking again. So, you're saying that your struggles actually shape the way you see the world? That's why you choose kindness? Yes, Keanu said simply. Because when you lose something or someone, you realize how fragile life is. And when you realize that, you don't want to waste time hurting others. You want to give what you can. Sometimes all you can give is kindness. And that's enough. The audience broke into applause, but it wasn't loud or wild like before. It was steady, respectful, almost grateful. People weren't just clapping for a celebrity, they were clapping for a human being who reminded them of something they had forgotten. Trevor smiled and nodded, clearly touched. You're giving us wisdom tonight, Keanu. I don't think I've ever had an interview where I feel like I'm being taught how to live better. Keanu chuckled lightly, shaking his head. I'm not trying to teach. I'm just sharing. My journey is mine. But maybe if someone hears it and feels less alone, then I'm happy. Trevor looked out at the audience and then back at Keanu. I think they're definitely hearing it. And they're feeling it. The cameras captured the moment perfectly, but even the viewers at home could sense the shift in the room. This wasn't entertainment anymore, it was a real conversation. Keanu's humility and openness turned the stage into something like a sanctuary, where truth was spoken without fear. Trevor leaned forward again, changing his tone slightly. You know, I often wonder about people like you, who seem so private. Why agree to interviews at all? Why sit here and share these personal thoughts? Keanu thought about it and then replied softly, because sometimes it's good to connect. I don't do many interviews, that's true. But when I do, I try to be present. I try to bring something real. Otherwise, what's the point? People don't need more noise. They need honesty. The audience nodded, murmuring softly in agreement. Trevor smiled, impressed by the wisdom in his guest's answer. You've got a way of saying things, Keanu. Simple, but powerful. Like you're reminding us of truths we already know but sometimes forget. Keanu shrugged humbly. Maybe. I think we all know these truths. We just need to hear them sometimes. The conversation carried on, flowing naturally. Trevor asked about moments when Keanu had experienced kindness from strangers, and Keanu shared small stories. He talked about a person who once offered him a seat on the subway when he was exhausted, or a stranger who helped him with directions in a city where he was lost. These little gestures stayed with him, reminding him that kindness doesn't have to be big to be meaningful. The audience reacted warmly to these stories, laughing gently at the lighter moments and nodding at the touching ones. Every detail made them feel closer to Keanu, not as a movie star but as a fellow human being walking through life. By the end of that part of the interview, Trevor looked almost reflective himself. He turned to the crowd and said, "You see, this is why Keanu Reeves is loved everywhere. It's not just the movies. It's not just the characters he plays. It's who he is. And tonight, we get to see it for ourselves." The audience clapped again, this time with even more warmth. Keanu bowed his head slightly, acknowledging their love without soaking in the attention. That was his way, quiet, respectful, and humble. The second part of the conversation had taken everyone deeper than they expected. It wasn't just about fame or Hollywood anymore. It was about life, struggles, and the choice to rise above pain with kindness. And although no one knew what Keanu would share next, they sensed that something even more powerful was still to come. The audience was fully engaged now. They had laughed at Trevor's jokes in the beginning, but the conversation had gone somewhere deeper, somewhere unexpected. Keanu Reeves had already spoken about humility, kindness, and the lessons that life had taught him. People in the room felt like they weren't just listening to a movie star, they were listening to a teacher, a philosopher, or maybe just a friend who had lived through a lot and wanted to share what he had learned. Trevor leaned forward again, his hands clasped together, his expression unusually serious. "Keanu," he said thoughtfully, "you've spoken about pain, about loss, and about kindness. But I think what people always wonder about you is, why do you live the way you do? You could choose to live like anyone else in Hollywood, big houses, fancy cars, endless spotlight. But instead, people see you giving up your seat on trains, sitting on park benches, or just moving around like an ordinary person. Why?" The audience shifted in their seats, eager for the answer. Keanu paused. He looked down for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. He rubbed his hands together lightly, then finally looked back up, his eyes calm but full of meaning. "I suppose," Keanu began slowly, "it's because I've realized that none of those things can make you happy. Success, money, fame, they can give you comfort, but they can't give you peace. And peace is what I value the most." The audience nodded quietly, some whispering in agreement. Trevor tilted his head, still listening closely. "Peace," he repeated softly, as if tasting the word. "That's something a lot of people search for their whole lives." Keanu leaned back in his chair and sighed gently, as if he was opening a door to a part of himself that wasn't often seen. "There was a time," he continued, "when I thought maybe I could escape pain by distracting myself. Work, parties, success, it felt like maybe those things could make the hurt less sharp. But it doesn't work that way. Eventually, I learned that the only way forward was to accept the pain, to carry it, and to still choose kindness despite it." The room grew quiet again. People sensed that he was about to reveal something deeply personal, something that wasn't part of a typical celebrity interview. Keanu looked at Trevor and then at the audience. His voice grew softer, but every word carried weight. "I once lost someone who meant everything to me. It changed my world. For a long time, I felt like I couldn't breathe. I walked through life, but it felt empty. And that was the moment I realized how fragile everything is. You think you'll have time, you think you'll always have tomorrow, but sometimes tomorrow doesn't come. And that realization never leaves you." The audience froze. They knew Keanu was sharing something raw, something real. Trevor's face softened, his eyes full of understanding. He didn't rush to fill the silence. He let Keanu's words hang in the air. Keanu continued, his voice steady but full of emotion. "When that happened, I promised myself something. I promised that if I could help someone else carry their pain even just a little, I would. Because I knew what it felt like to need that, and to not always have it. That's why I live the way I do. That's why I don't care for all the extra noise of fame. I just want to be present. I want to make sure that if someone crosses paths with me, they walk away feeling lighter, not heavier." The crowd murmured softly, moved by the honesty in his words. Some people were wiping tears, others nodding deeply as though he was speaking directly to their own experiences. Trevor finally spoke, his voice almost a whisper. "That's incredible, Keanu. Honestly, I don't know what to say. You've just opened your heart in a way that not many people ever do, let alone on television." Keanu gave a small smile. "I don't talk about it often. But tonight felt like the right time. Maybe someone out there needs to hear it. Maybe someone is carrying their own pain, thinking they're alone. And if my story helps them feel less alone, then it's worth sharing." The audience broke into gentle applause, not wild or noisy, but filled with admiration and gratitude. Trevor pressed his hand to his chest, clearly touched by the moment. "You've turned this into one of the most meaningful interviews I've ever had," he admitted. Keanu shook his head humbly. "It's just life. We all have a story. Mine isn't more important than anyone else's, it's just mine. But the lesson I've learned is simple: hold on to love, even when it hurts. And never underestimate the power of kindness." The audience clapped again, louder this time, standing on their feet. It wasn't just applause for a celebrity, it was applause for truth, for honesty, for the courage to speak about something real in a world full of noise. Trevor looked around at the standing crowd and then back at Keanu, shaking his head in amazement. "You know what, Keanu? You've done it. You've shocked me, and I think you've shocked everyone here, not with a headline, not with a secret scandal, but with your heart. And I don't think any of us will forget this." Keanu bowed his head slightly, his smile soft. "Thank you. That means a lot." The moment felt sacred. Even though the cameras were rolling, everyone in that room felt like they were part of something bigger than just an interview. It was a reminder that behind every face in the crowd, behind every person walking down the street, there's a story. And sometimes, sharing that story can change the way others see the world. The energy in the studio had shifted entirely. When the interview began, the air was filled with excitement and laughter. Now it was filled with respect, admiration, and reflection. People would leave the show that night not just entertained but changed, carrying Keanu's words with them like a gentle guide. And Trevor Noah, usually the master of humor and quick wit, sat back in his chair almost speechless. He finally laughed lightly, saying, "I don't think I can make another joke tonight. You've made me too thoughtful." The audience laughed softly, releasing some of the emotion in the room. Keanu chuckled with him, and for a moment, the heaviness lifted. But the message remained. Everyone knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary, a man who had seen life's darkest sides, yet chose to live with compassion and humility, and had the courage to speak about it openly. That part of the interview would soon spread far beyond the walls of the studio. Clips would be shared online, headlines would capture the moment, and millions would watch from around the world. But for those in the room that night, it felt like something more personal. It felt like Keanu had spoken directly to them, leaving them with a truth they would carry forever. Trevor Noah sat back in his chair, and for once, he didn't have a quick comeback ready. Normally, he could turn any moment into humor, but this time he felt his throat tighten. He looked at Keanu, then glanced at the audience, who were still standing in admiration after what they had just heard. It wasn't every day that a Hollywood star opened up so deeply about life, loss, and kindness. Trevor cleared his throat, trying to regain his usual energy, but even his voice carried a softness. "Keanu," he said, shaking his head slowly, "I've interviewed presidents, musicians, athletes, comedians, you name it. But I don't think I've ever had someone sit here and speak with such honesty. I mean, you've managed to make me, a professional talker, completely speechless." The audience laughed lightly, breaking the heaviness of the moment, but their eyes were still locked on Keanu. Keanu gave a shy smile, almost embarrassed by the praise. "Thank you," he said simply, lowering his head as if he wanted to move the focus away from himself. Trevor leaned forward again. Do you realize what you've just done here? You came to talk about a movie, maybe share some stories, and instead you've given everyone in this room something they'll carry for the rest of their lives. Keanu tilted his head slightly and replied with calm humility. I don't think I've done anything special. I just spoke the truth. Sometimes the truth can surprise people because we don't always hear it. But it's always there, waiting. The audience clapped softly again, as if agreeing with him. Trevor chuckled, his face filled with disbelief. You know, you've really messed me up tonight, he joked, placing a hand over his chest. I had all these funny questions prepared, and now I feel like I should just go home and meditate on life. The audience laughed harder this time, and Keanu laughed gently with them. But even as the room lightened up, the weight of what he had shared lingered like an echo. Trevor wasn't ready to let go of the moment. He asked, do you think the world could be a better place if more people lived with the perspective you've just shared, choosing kindness, choosing humility? Keanu thought for a moment before answering. I think the world is already full of good people. Sometimes we just forget. We get caught up in rushing, competing, worrying about things that don't matter in the long run. But when you stop and look, you see kindness everywhere. The challenge is remembering to see it, and then to give it back. If more of us did that, maybe the world would feel a little lighter. There was silence in the room for a moment, then applause burst out again, louder and longer this time. Trevor shook his head as he clapped along. Ladies and gentlemen, this man isn't just an actor, he's a poet disguised as a human being. Keanu chuckled, raising his hand as if to gently push away the compliment. I'm no poet. I'm just someone who's learned some lessons. And I'm still learning. Trevor leaned back with a wide smile, still amazed. That's another thing, you're one of the most famous people on earth, yet you speak like someone who's still on the journey, still figuring things out. That's rare. Keanu nodded thoughtfully. Maybe that's because it's true. I don't think anyone ever has it all figured out. Life keeps teaching us, no matter how old we get or how much we've seen. The audience nodded, some clapping again in agreement. There was a feeling in the room that this was no longer just an interview, it was a life lesson disguised as late-night television. Trevor sat forward, placing both hands on his desk. Okay, I've got to ask you this before we end up writing a philosophy book here. When people call you the internet's favorite person, when they share all those stories about your kindness, do you ever feel pressure to live up to that image? Keanu smiled softly. I don't think about it that way. I don't wake up and say, I need to be someone's favorite person. I just try to be myself. If people see kindness in that, then I'm grateful. But I'm also just a person. I make mistakes. I have my struggles. I'm not perfect. And I don't want anyone to think I am. The audience responded with warm applause, touched by his humility. Trevor nodded, clearly impressed. You see, that right there is what makes you so unique. Most people would chase that image, try to keep it polished. But you just say, I'm human. And honestly, that's refreshing. Keanu shrugged gently. Maybe being human is enough. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to try. That simple sentence hit the audience like a wave. They clapped again, many of them smiling, some still wiping away tears from earlier. Trevor spread his arms wide, turning to the crowd. Can we all just agree that we need more Keanus in this world? The audience roared in agreement, cheering and clapping loudly. Keanu bowed his head again, smiling in his quiet, modest way. He never basked in the applause, but the crowd gave it anyway, overflowing with love for him. Trevor laughed as the cheers continued. Look at this. You've got them in tears, you've got them clapping every 5 minutes, and you've got me forgetting how to do my job. You, sir, are dangerous. The crowd laughed again, and the mood lightened, but the respect in the room didn't fade. As the conversation neared its end, Trevor decided to ask one final question. If you could leave everyone watching with just one thought, one thing to hold on to when life feels heavy, what would it be? Keanu grew quiet, thinking. The room waited, holding on to the silence. Then, with calm certainty, he said, I would tell them to treasure the people they love. Because time is not promised. And if you can walk through this world giving more love than you take, then you've lived a good life. The audience erupted into applause once again, some rising to their feet. Trevor placed both hands over his face, shaking his head in amazement. You've officially broken me, Keanu. I'm done. I don't think I can ever top this moment. The cheers grew louder, filling the studio with an energy that was both joyful and emotional. Keanu lifted his hand, waving gently to the crowd with that same humble smile he had worn since the beginning. Trevor leaned toward him with genuine warmth. Keanu Reeves, ladies and gentlemen, the man who came here to promote a movie and ended up giving us a masterclass on life. Thank you, my friend. Truly, thank you. Keanu reached over and shook Trevor's hand, their grip firm and full of respect. The audience clapped until their hands hurt, many of them shouting words of love and gratitude. It was clear that something rare had just happened. An interview that started like any other had transformed into an unforgettable night, a conversation that would live in the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. As the cameras captured the final moments, Trevor smiled at the audience and said, "We'll be right back after this break, but honestly, I think we've already had the best part of the show." The crowd laughed and cheered again, still energized by what they had just experienced. Keanu sat quietly, smiling gently, his presence calm but powerful. He had shared his truth, and in doing so, he had touched everyone in the room and soon, millions around the world. When the cameras went dark for the commercial break, the audience was still buzzing with excitement and emotion. Many people were standing, talking quietly among themselves about what they had just witnessed. Some said they had never cried during a late-night show before. Others admitted that Keanu's words reminded them of their own loved ones, of moments they had taken for granted. The atmosphere was unlike anything the studio had experienced before. Trevor Noah sat back in his chair, still looking stunned. He glanced at Keanu with a smile that was both grateful and amazed. "You know," he said softly, "I think you just gave us one of the most memorable nights we've ever had on this stage." Keanu lowered his eyes humbly, brushing his hair back with his hand. "I just spoke from the heart," he replied. "That's all I can do." The crew, who usually moved around quickly during breaks, paused for a moment to clap quietly for him. Even behind the cameras, people felt the power of his honesty. It wasn't scripted, it wasn't polished, it was simply real, and that made it unforgettable. When the show wrapped and the audience left the studio, many people lingered outside, still talking about what they had heard. Some pulled out their phones, already writing posts about Keanu's words. Others shared personal stories with strangers, explaining how his message touched them deeply. For a while, the street outside the studio felt like an extension of the interview, people opening up, connecting, and remembering the importance of kindness. Within hours, clips from the episode began circulating online. The moment when Keanu spoke about loss and the importance of kindness spread across social media platforms. Millions of people watched, shared, and commented. Some wrote about how his words made them call their parents just to say "I love you." Others said they finally felt encouraged to forgive someone they had been holding resentment against. It was as if Keanu's quiet wisdom had reached across screens and into homes around the world. Trevor himself shared a short message later that night. He posted a picture of himself and Keanu from the show with the caption, "Tonight wasn't just an interview. It was a reminder of what it means to be human. Thank you, Keanu." The post went viral, receiving thousands of replies, all praising both the host and the guest for creating such a special moment. Meanwhile, Keanu went on with his life as he always did. The next day, paparazzi spotted him walking through the city, carrying his own bag and stopping to greet a few fans who approached him politely. He didn't mention the viral interview. He didn't comment on the headlines calling him the philosopher of Hollywood. He just kept living the same simple way he always had, proving once again that his humility was not an act, it was who he truly was. But for Trevor Noah, the interview remained in his mind for weeks. He often spoke about it in conversations, telling friends how Keanu had changed the way he thought about life. In one of his stand-up shows, Trevor joked, "Keanu Reeves came on my show and gave me therapy for free. Now I owe him money." The audience laughed, but behind the humor, people could tell he meant every word about how deeply the conversation had impacted him. Viewers around the world kept rewatching the interview. Teachers showed clips to their students. Motivational speakers quoted Keanu's words in their talks. Even people who had never watched a single one of his films shared the video, saying they had found something meaningful in his honesty. The interview had become more than entertainment, it had become a reminder to value love, kindness, and presence in a world that often forgets those simple truths. For Keanu, none of this attention mattered. When asked about the viral success of his appearance, he smiled quietly and said, "I'm just glad if it helps someone." He didn't chase the spotlight or brag about the influence his words had created. Instead, he stayed the same kind, thoughtful, and grounded. Months later, Trevor invited him back for another show, and during the introduction, he said to the audience, "You know, last time Keanu was here, he broke the internet with wisdom. Tonight, I'm just hoping I can keep up with him." The crowd laughed and cheered, excited to see the two together again. But even then, Keanu remained humble, never trying to repeat the viral magic, only sharing what was honest in that moment. The impact of that first interview never faded. People remembered it not as a celebrity story, but as a human story. It became a reference point whenever discussions about kindness, humility, or resilience came up. In offices, in classrooms, and even around dinner tables, people repeated his words, "Maybe being human is enough. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to try." For Trevor, it was a turning point in his own journey as a host. He admitted later in an interview that Keanu had reminded him why he loved having conversations on stage. "It's not just about making people laugh," he said. "It's about connecting. Keanu showed me that the best moments are the ones where we forget the cameras and just listen to each other." As time passed, the story of Keanu Reeves shocking Trevor Noah remained one of those rare media moments that felt timeless. It wasn't built on drama, controversy, or spectacle. It was built on sincerity, the kind of sincerity that speaks to something universal in every person. And for those who had been in the studio that night, the memory stayed vivid. Some would say later that it felt almost like being part of a shared dream, an ordinary talk show that turned into something extraordinary. Keanu never claimed to have the answers to life. He never pretended to be more than human. And maybe that was exactly why his words carried such weight. In a world often filled with noise, he had chosen to speak softly. In a time when many chased attention, he chose humility. And in that choice, he left a mark that people would remember for years to come. The interview became a story told and retold, the night Keanu Reeves shocked Trevor Noah, not with scandal, not with spectacle, but with the quiet power of truth. And the lesson that echoed long after was simple yet unforgettable: love the people around you, value the small moments, and never underestimate the power of kindness.